Chapter 1, Prologue. It's about time I accepted it. I'm screwed. You will no longer be recognized as a member of the Roths-Taylor family due to your crimes. For inappropriately swearing in front of the Honorable Princess Peenia, for illegally intervening with the Holy Sylvania Academy's entrance exam due to being blinded by your jealousy, and lastly, for neglecting your classes. These crimes have tarnished the family's name and cannot be taken lightly. There was no reason to read the rest. The letter was from the head of the house, Crepin Roths-Taylor. It's filled with needless formalities, but in the end, the summary was as follows. You will be disowned by the family. The life of living like a king with the support of a powerful family was over. It felt like the god of fate was mocking me. Was he having fun laughing at my misfortunes? When my life had just become a living hell. The letter's words lingered, stuck in my head. I wanted to respond to the unfair mocking words. Why? Because the Ed Roths-Taylor that used the family name as a shield to live an arrogant life was not me. I gathered all your belongings here. Thank you for your hard work. The maid who worked at Offellis Hall, the finest dormitory at Sylvania Academy, politely gave her greetings. With a blank face, I received 2 large wooden suitcases from her. Even though my room was so luxurious, all my belongings surprisingly fit within these 2 bags. After the support from my family was cut off, this was all I had. In other words, the luxuries within that room were never mine to begin with. I hope you live the rest of your life well. Even though my life was essentially now in the gutter, I still received honorable treatment as a former noble. But although I was treated with respect, it ultimately felt like adding salt to injury. Slam. The Offellis Hall's large door swung shut, leaving me all alone in its beautiful garden. I thought it was about time I came to terms with it. I actually entered the game. I can't believe it. At the worst possible time, I became the worst possible person in my favorite game. A game of which I was the only fan. Sylvania's failed swordmaster. I lowered my bags and swiped both hands over my face. I'm fucked. I didn't know what to do. Ed Roths-Taylor was a name I was not too comfortable having. Sylvania's failed swordmaster had a total of 43 episodes. I played the game over 5 times, but it was still a name I barely remembered. The reason was obvious. It's because Ed Roths-Taylor was a third-class villain that left the moment he showed up. Hey, look over there. Isn't that Ed Roths-Taylor? Shit, don't look. He'll notice. Do we even have to worry anymore? Wasn't he already expelled? I heard from a friend at Offellis Hall yesterday that they even kicked him out of his room. I guess we won't be seeing him next semester then. It's funny, isn't it? Just like how we don't know how high the sky is, there really is no way to know what could happen to someone's life. Why did he even use such a trick at the entrance exam? I knew he was like this from the beginning. Even without skills, he always kept showing off. As soon as lunchtime came around, the students began to gather at the student center. After putting down my large wooden bags beside me and covering my face, my ears itched at the whispers. A person's rise and fall was perfect fodder for gossip. But even though I understood that fact, I can't help but feel it was unfair. Before I became this character, I was someone who lived frugally and honestly, working hard without ambition. So wasn't it a bit too much to treat someone like me like a criminal? Sigh. I wanted to smoke. I took a deep breath and looked at the crowd of people gossiping, and they slowly dispersed and eventually disappeared. 2 hours had passed since I got kicked out of the dormitories. It felt like my brain had stopped working because of the unbelievable situation I was in, leaving me feeling dizzy. Good thing I had finally calmed down somehow. While I knew this was a completely unrealistic scenario, I was still able to accept these drastic changes to some extent. Being able to quickly calm down must be something Ed Roths-Taylor was capable of. But enough about that. Right now, I needed to figure out what I had to do. I needed to establish my course of action. I opened my wooden bag and took out an ornate mirror from my belongings. I looked at my reflection, my previous appearance now gone. Instead, there was a handsome-looking blonde boy staring right back at me. This was now my new appearance. Name: Ed Roths-Taylor. Gender: male. Age: 17. School year: 2nd. Species: human. Achievements: none. Vitality: 3. Intelligence: 4. Dexterity, 7. Willpower, 7. Luck, 6. Combat skills details, magic skills details, life skills details, alchemy skills details. Having played Sylvania's failed swordmaster 5 times now, it was already a familiar information window to me. This was the same method used to open one's information in the game. By using any object that shows your reflection like a mirror, a creek, a pond, or even a glass cup, you just have to imbue it with your magic power to see your skills window. The similarities going this far made this feel even more like a dream. And looking at my skills only made me wish this really was a dream. These pathetic skills were not befitting of a student attending the Sylvania Academy's magic department. His embarrassingly low vitality must be because of his upbringing as an aristocrat. In the game, a regular farmer's vitality averaged between a 5 to a 6. The main character, who was focused on combat and fighting skills, had a vitality of above 20. So considering these numbers, Ed's vitality stat was truly pathetic. Although looking at the numbers, my dexterity and willpower seemed to be decent, but still nothing extraordinary. Comparing my skills to that of the main character, the differences were quite obvious. Ed Roths-Taylor was just a third-rate villain who appeared at the beginning of the game to add some conflict. He was nothing more or less than that. I don't even remember what happened to him afterward. No, wait, I do remember. At the end of the game, he briefly showed up in the credits, begging on the streets of the city while sitting on a straw mat. Ah, I shouldn't have remembered that. Sigh. I couldn't help but let out a sigh as I laid back. Ed was a noble who grew up sheltered, ignorant to the ways of the world, only to be one day thrown out onto the streets with nothing. It was an expected ending for him. For now, I had to avoid starving on the side of the street as he did. And how was I supposed to do that? I didn't have the answer to that question. But after thinking it over for a while, I could only say this. By whatever means, I would survive. Chapter 2 10 days before school starts. Sylvania Academy was more like a bustling city rather than a school. Founded on the entire Akan Island southwest of the kingdom, the school was so massive that even alumni were yet to explore the whole campus. But what did that mean? It meant one could encounter anything walking around the extensive school grounds. The students' heavy gazes followed me as I walked, and I ended up at an undeveloped forest somewhere northwest of the island. Most school facilities were located in the southeast while commercial and services facilities were in the southwest. The island used to only have one bridge connecting both sides, the buildings naturally developing around it. I eventually arrived at the northeastern edge of the island after walking the whole afternoon. My legs were so sore I had to sit on a tree stump to rest. After walking half the day, I was able to organize my thoughts and came to a conclusion. First things first. I'm not leaving this island. There's no helping it. I was now Ed Roths-Taylor. I had to find a way to adapt and live somehow. Sylvania Academy received the highest praise among the prestigious academies in the kingdom. It's a school where noble families desperately aim to enroll their children, a school that required either overwhelming talent or wealth. Obtaining a Sylvania diploma would enable me to make a living. I needed to bear through this and obtain mine. Nothing is as valuable in this difficult and unpredictable world. Besides, leaving the academy would be the same as throwing my life away. I had played through Sylvania's failed swordmaster a few times already. If Ed Roths-Taylor just got expelled, that meant the story had just begun. This meant I'm in a position where I knew most of the things that would happen in the academy. As long as I'm here, I'll be able to use my knowledge of the game to my advantage. I saw no reason for me to go out into the unknown world outside. The sun was setting before I knew it. Sat alone on a tree stump in a deserted forest, I let out another deep sigh and wiped my face. Let's see. I put the 2 wooden suitcases on the grass and opened them. They were full of clothes and old textbooks. There were some magic tools, but since their output was adjusted for students, they weren't very useful. Despite having lived in such an extravagant room, this was everything I owned. What an empty life. Even though I got kicked out of my family, at least I haven't been expelled from the academy yet. Although it could already be considered an expulsion, given I won't be able to afford the enormous tuition without my family's support. Thankfully, my tuition had already been paid until the next semester. If I could endure until then and get a scholarship or find a way to earn money, I would still be able to attend the academy. However, I needed to be mindful of my time limit. I only had until next semester to figure things out. The scenery sure is beautiful. I found a stream after walking a bit more. It flowed from the other side of the island all the way here. I let myself enjoy the beautiful forest bathed in moonlight, quiet with only the sound of crickets. But this wasn't the time to be sentimental. I'll starve to death at this rate. There were a lot of things I needed to live a good life. I tore a twig off a tree and wrote on the ground. Goal equals graduation. My goal was to graduate. Ed Roths-Taylor is currently in his second year. That leaves me 6 more semesters until graduation. The tuition fee for one semester was about 20 gold coins, an amount enough to buy a whole carriage covered in gold. But that price is cheap compared to all the other expenses. Most of the students stayed in luxury dormitories, only ate fine dining meals, and only used high-class magic equipment, all while bringing 2 to 3 servants with them. Taking all of that into account, the price of a gold-plated carriage doesn't seem so expensive in perspective. I didn't know what to do about my tuition fees, nor about obtaining a scholarship. With my lackluster skills, it'd be hard enough trying not to fail, let alone qualify for one. It makes no sense why Ed had such an arrogant personality given his lack of skill. But it was a question not even worth asking. He was just a character at the beginning of the game, written for the protagonist to win against. Anyhow, the most important thing right now was to sort out the things I needed to live and survive. The important trinity of food, clothing, and shelter. I had clothes. I didn't know if I would be able to do my laundry, but I should be able to avoid looking like a beggar for a week. Food and shelter were my problems. I had nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat tonight. Sigh. No. I shook my head and slapped my cheeks. Nothing will change if all I do is sigh. I clenched my teeth, stood up, and began stretching. First, my hips, then my legs, then a full set of the national gymnastic routine, finishing off with a set of jumping exercises and push-ups. The sound of my heavy breathing refreshed my body and mind. Because the entrance exam had already taken place, there shouldn't be much time left until the semester starts. If I were to guess, there were probably only 10 days left. The first thing I needed to do was make a livable environment so I could continue going to the academy. I could build something in 10 days. I should build a place I could live in. There was a pleasant cool spring breeze blowing so I could sleep out in the open if I really needed to, but I didn't know if I would be able to sleep on the ground. Should I make a simple tent? I don't need to go out of my way to make a proper tent. A simple shelter shouldn't be all that hard. If I were to use thick tree trunks as supports and cover them with a canopy, it should become somewhat of a roofed shelter. The forest in the northeastern part of Akan Island was quite well preserved. Spotting a spirit meant the place had yet to be touched by humans. There were many tree trunks that could be used to support the canopy in the area. I should at least be moving while thinking. I don't have the luxury of only thinking. I should also be working as well. Staring at my reflection on the stream, I focused on my eyes once again. Name: Ed Roths-Taylor. Gender: male. Age: achievements: none. Vitality: 3. Intelligence: 4. Dexterity: 7. Willpower: 7. Luck: 6. Combat skills details. Magic skills details. Life skills details. Alchemy skills details. Ignoring my embarrassing stats, I focused on the details of my magic skills. Magic skills details. Grade: low-grade magician. Specialized field: elements. Common magic. Fast casting level 1. Mana sense level 1. Fire element magic. Ignite level 2. Wind element magic. Wind blade level 1. Magicians specializing in elements only have 2 basic magic spells. Furthermore, first-year elemental-based magicians were required to choose 2 elements to specialize in. Ed looked to have chosen fire and wind, but seeing as he hardly trained even the most basics of his spells, he really was lazy. Whatever. At least I was able to check that I had magic spells I could use. I felt the mana in my body the deeper I went into the forest. Of course, compared to the protagonist's overflowing amount of mana, mine was infinitely weaker. At least it enabled me to cut down these moderately sized tree trunks. I used wind blade to cut the branches down to a manageable size. There would be no point if I couldn't carry them back. After cutting through 5 to 6 tree trunks, I was already out of breath. Just like I expected, this body couldn't handle mana freely. I desperately needed to train. Seriously, what a freaking pain. I spat on the ground and caught my breath for a moment, then took the cut branches to where there is sunlight. The frames kept slipping off the ground because the strength wasn't balanced. This wasn't working. It would be better to dig out holes to put down the foundations. After digging out the holes and setting up the 4 foundations, I angled them to meet in the middle. It wasn't an easy task. I only had 2 hands for the 4 support beams. Thankfully, I was able to compensate by holding the pieces of wood with my head and shoulder. I tied the pieces of wood together where they met with a leather belt. It was from a high-class tunic I found in my bag. I then used the last piece of wood as a stake through the middle, digging it into the ground to make sure the whole thing won't fall over. Although a bit lame and unstable, the frame of my shelter was completed. It wasn't pretty. The branches didn't exactly meet in the middle, and because I didn't calculate anything, the resulting height was lower than I anticipated. That said, once I covered this with a canopy, it should be good enough to spend the night in. I considered using some of my clothes to cover the top but ultimately decided against it. Not only would I need to use 4 to 5 pieces to cover the whole frame, but it would also mean sacrificing clothes I would wear starting tomorrow. I didn't want to do that. Besides, these clothes were of high quality. I may even be able to sell them. I didn't want to just use them as a roof. To compromise, I decided to tie 2 pieces of clothes together and laid them on the ground. I couldn't just sleep on the dirt. What should I use to cover my shelter with then? No matter how much I thought about it, I still didn't know what to do. I eventually went back into the forest and brought back tree branches with long and wide leaves. The whole process took almost an hour. And another hour to cover my shelter with the branches. Phew, this is exhausting. Finally done, I stretched my back and wiped my sweat off. It was hard work, but at least it's now over. In front of me was a shelter I could lay down in. I felt a sense of accomplishment at the feat. Open double angle bracket production completed. Production skills have increased. Close double angle bracket. Open double angle bracket. The list of completed products has been updated. Close double angle bracket. The message popped up. I tilted my head, puzzled. I went to the stream and focused on my eyes. The window that materialized wasn't the usual long information window. Instead, it was different. Life skills details. Grade: beginner craftsman. Specialized fields: none. Handicraft level 4. Design level 1. Collecting skills level 1. Oh, what's this? It seemed like Ed was someone with a talent for production rather than magic. It made sense, I guess, given how his dexterity was better than his intelligence and vitality. Newly crafted product. Simple wooden shelter. A shelter where you can temporarily rest. It's of low-grade quality and is quite shabby. If you don't maintain it, its duration won't last long. Production difficulty level. Circle left half filled hollow circle hollow circle hollow circle hollow circle. The window was a welcome sight. I didn't know the production system could be activated like this. If I were to manage my production proficiency, then wouldn't it be possible for me to do the same in the other areas? That's great news. Thinking about it, it's possible to overcome my current situation after all. I'm too tired right now, however, and am mentally at my limit. I needed a break. I went and laid down in my completed shelter, listening to the buzz of nature all around me. Darkness arrived. Unable to see anything, I closed my eyes and felt myself slowly drifting off to sleep. I knew I was in a difficult situation, left with so many things to resolve. But for now, I needed to sleep. Sleep first, then I will face tomorrow. And tomorrow, after sunrise, I will find a long-term plan to survive in this academy. Chapter 3, 7 days before school starts. 1. 3 days passed by somehow. I didn't spend the last 3 days in vain. It would be too tiring to list everything I did, but also too difficult to briefly summarize them. The first thing I actually did was fortify the shelter I made. On the second night, my shelter unexpectedly collapsed, and I had to fetch more wood from the forest to reinforce the frame. It would have been great had I had a rope to secure the frame together, but since I didn't have any, I just dug more holes for the foundation and stuck the support beams into each. And then I was worried it may leak if it rained, so I ended up sacrificing 3 to 4 pieces of my clothes to cover the leaves I used as the roof. I then covered the clothes with even larger leaves. Well, the added weight caused the support beams to collapse. I ended up having to add horizontal supports to hold the weight. Then I had to twist some of my old clothes together and use them as ropes to tie the new frame together. The truth is, I actually felt it was a waste to use some of my clothes this way. I thought if I took them to a pawn shop, I would have gotten at least a few silver coins for them. Although after giving it some thought, I decided not to. There was no way a pawnshop would buy such clothes unless they were luxury items adorned with jewels. I still had a few valuables I could sell, so it should be fine. However, the pawn shop is in the next city. It would be difficult to leave Akan Island just to go to the shop. I was worried I wouldn't make enough profits to even return, and that's something I didn't want. And while taking a carriage would be a quick trip, walking would take me 2 days and 1 night. Since I didn't have money for a carriage, walking would have been my only option. The journey wouldn't have been an easy one. Sitting by the stream, I sharpened the tip of a branch with my dagger. Since I decided not to leave the academy grounds, I needed to work on my 3 basic needs: food, clothing, and shelter. I had enough clothes to wear for the next few days. I even had a house, although shabby. The problem was I had nothing to eat. I went to find food in the forest on the second day. I actually used to live in the countryside in my past life. That's probably why the forest and the mountain felt familiar somehow. Finding food is a different matter, however. There were plants everywhere, but distinguishing which was edible was a different matter. I wasn't an expert on survival, by any means. There was a limit to what my eyes could discern as edible or not. In the end, I opted to cut the bark off some pine trees instead. Tree barks had an inner white flesh. My grandfather told me about it when I was young. He said he used to boil and eat tree bark when harvests were terrible and food was scarce. I ripped the white flesh off the outer bark using a ceremonial dagger I found in my luggage. Lighting a fire with my magic, I cooked the flesh in boiling water from the stream using a decorational cup, not having any pot with me. Once cooked, I gnawed on the chewy bark of the pine tree. It was awful, but I managed to eat all of it. Then I had raging diarrhea that night. I guessed tree bark was never meant for human consumption after all. I was starving on the 3rd day. On top of that, I was also suffering from diarrhea. I looked beyond terrible. I shaved off a branch and tied the ceremonial dagger to one end using a handkerchief. However, the handkerchief felt loose, so I had to use vines I scavenged from the forest to tighten the dagger and the wood together. Newly crafted product. Simple harpoon. Made using a ceremonial dagger tied to a well-cut branch. Can be used for fishing or hunting. The dagger is not as sharp, reducing its power and effectiveness. Production difficulty level. Circle left half filled hollow circle hollow circle hollow circle hollow circle. Open double angle bracket production completed. Production skills have increased. Close double angle bracket. When I was younger, I used to show off that I was skilled in catching freshwater fish. But now that I was at death's door from hunger, catching fish had become serious business. Even though the dagger wasn't as sharp compared to a traditional fishing harpoon, I could make up for it with my experience. The firewood crackled as it burned. It was a relief I had fire magic. It meant I didn't have to go through all the trouble of starting a fire. I somehow felt grateful to Ed for choosing to specialize in fire. Ellipsis. Although, was this even something to be thankful for? Anyhow, since I was having no luck in gathering food, it was the right decision to focus on hunting instead. I was able to catch some freshwater fish, thanks to the skills I had when I was younger. I skewered the fishes I caught and grilled them over the fire. The problem was they became softer as they cooked. The meat started flaking and falling off the wood, causing me to lose so many precious pieces of fish. It would have been great if I could make something similar to a grill, but because I lack the proper materials, I wouldn't be able to right now. I ended up having to eat the hot fish straight from the stick, burning my tongue. Kaya, I could almost feel my body absorbing its much-needed nutrients. To be honest, it didn't taste that great. But I was thankful enough to eat and fill my stomach with something. I ended up eating about 4 to 5 fish. To drink, I dunked my head down the stream and gulped down a few swallows of the freshwater. Phew, I wasn't full, by any means. But I was able to deal with the immediate hunger that had been bothering me for the last 2 days. I laid down on the gravel by the stream, looking up at the sky. Laying down idly, the sun slowly began to set. 1 more week until school started. I had been having difficulties resolving my problems with food, clothing, and shelter. How harder would it be when school starts? Would it even be possible for me to receive a scholarship? But instead of debating with myself whether it'd be possible or not, I just had to go for it. A Sylvania Academy diploma would be a reliable tool to survive in this unpredictable world. Graduates of Sylvania went on to become important individuals in the kingdom. No matter how poorly they did at the academy, the mere fact that they were from Sylvania allowed them to fill high-ranking positions in expedition forces and in the local underground magic society. Simply put, no matter how hard staying in Sylvania may be, it would still be several times better than starting out with nothing. Is someone there? I heard a voice calling while I lay down by the stream. The northern part of Akan Island was not a place students and professors visited often. This area was never used aside for practical exercises and tests. This was why hearing the young voice came as a surprise. Even more so that I recognized whose voice it was. Is that you, Ed Roth's Taylor? It was the 3rd princess of the Crowell Empire, Peenia Elias Crowell. Also known as Princess Peenia. Princess Peenia was one of the 4 main heroines in Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster. She was an influential character during the first half of the story. Well, at least, that was what was going to happen. Right now, she must still be a freshman. She was set to meet the protagonist, Taylor, during the entrance examination, where she took the exam with her identity hidden. That's right. She was the one who accused me, revealing that I manipulated the test due to my envy of the protagonist, providing the perfect opportunity for my family to disown me. I heard you were disowned. What are you doing here? What was I doing here? That's what I wanted to ask her. This wasn't a place the 3rd princess would normally visit, someone who was usually escorted by 6 to 7 of her knights. I looked up at the princess. Her elegant white blonde hair and frilled dress did not match the wild forest background. And yet, she didn't look to be dressed as fancy as she normally would have. Only then did I realize that the class assignment examination episode must currently be taking place. It was definitely an episode that took place in the northern forest of Akan Island. Held a week before school started, it was a test to determine the students' levels before entering the Academy's magic department. Professor Glast of the magic department, infamous for his nasty personality, was in charge of the freshmen's examination. The exam was to find the magically infused marbles spread randomly across the northern forest. It was a test to see if the students were able to detect the magic. After all, the basis of magic starts with sensing it. It's an honor to meet you again, Princess Peenia. Her eyes were fierce, the eyes of someone who despised me. It felt unfair, given my circumstances. But no one would believe me, even if I told anyone. I sat up and respectfully gave my greetings to the princess. I thought you would have been kicked out from the academy. I was kicked out of the dormitory. I asked what you are doing here. The princess looked at the simple shelter I built, the campfire I lit, and the bones from the fish I ate with disbelief on her face. You still haven't left the academy. Unfortunate as it may be, I am still a student. Did you not go through with the expulsion process? I didn't think it was necessary. I was humiliated and no longer receiving support from my own family, so there was no way for me to continue attending the academy. Princess Peenia's lips had twisted, probably finding it hard to believe that a nobleman who had been humiliated and excommunicated would be able to continue attending Sylvania. If the Academic Affairs Committee finds out about this, you will be expelled right away. Quote ellipsis ellipsis quote. I'll talk to the committee tomorrow. Did you think you would be allowed to stay here? My plan to obtain a diploma from Sylvania Academy was already about to be ruined. But I shouldn't think like that. I let out a deep sigh and began thinking of a solution. If the princess herself judges it to be so, it can't be helped. In fact, not just you, but many of the students despise me. I'm sure it's the same for the academy's staff as well. If you already know that, why don't you just leave on your own then? Isn't it better to leave with dignity rather than go through a humiliating expulsion process? I want to continue attending Sylvania Academy. I don't recommend doing it. Princess Peenia crossed her arms and stared at me with contempt. Leave. Everyone here despises you, and you despise everyone else. You must be mistaken. I don't despise anyone. You must not remember how arrogant you were, how much hatred you had inside of you. Well, it is difficult to view oneself objectively. That's not true. My only way to salvage this situation was to talk myself out of it. The truth is, Princess, I actually feel grateful towards you. Princess Peenia looked at me in disbelief. Chapter 4, 7 days before school starts. 2. The Roths-Taylor family I was once a part of is a family of villains. Drunk on the power of their name, every new generation had devolved into conceit and elitism. The honorable and generous ancestors had all gone. All that was left was their sense of privilege as they condescendingly sat in high positions of power in the empire. Actually, the Roths-Taylor family had a big secret. The head of the family, Crepin Roths-Taylor, signed a contract with the evil god of the mythic age, Mebula, to study the magic of eternal life. Due to this, many inhumane experiments had been conducted, sacrificing numerous lives in the name of research. 2 years later, this secret was discovered by Taylor, the protagonist. After struggling until the end, Crepin Roths-Taylor was finally defeated. The head of the Roths-Taylor family, Crepin Roths-Taylor. He was the final boss in Act 4 of Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster. After that, what happened to the arrogant and entitled Roths-Taylor family was as expected. The family's horrible downfall brought excitement to the players. Everyone who actively took part in Crepin Roths-Taylor's plans was executed. Even those who were only partially involved were, at the very least, either imprisoned or punished. Considering all of that, my current situation was worthy of a second look. Yes, I was cold and hungry, not knowing what I was to do with my life. But wasn't I cut off from the Roths-Taylor family in advance? Simply put, there's only one thing for me to say. This was actually a good turn of events. Did you just say you are thankful to me? I find that hard to believe. I stood up from my seat. But considering I have lived in the wild for the last 3 days, I probably didn't look my best. I'm guessing that's why the princess looked taken aback. Only a few days ago, she saw me as a noble, acting like a condescending jerk to others. It must have felt satisfying for her to see me now. Although there might also be a bit of pity there. I thought of taking advantage of that. However, as far as I know, Princess Peenia never let her personal feelings intervene with public judgment. Appealing to her emotions would more likely backfire. What was the best outcome for me in this situation? Regardless of whether I went to this school or not, it would be for Princess Peenia to stop concerning herself with me. Not only the princess, but all the other students of Sylvania Academy also needed to stop paying me any attention. If it was uselessly publicized that Ed Roths-Taylor hadn't been expelled, I would be the only one losing. From the Academy's perspective, it wouldn't be strange if I quit school at any time. I was already straddling the border of expulsion. From a more academic perspective, I shouldn't do anything to stand out until I was in a better position to not get expelled. It would do me nothing good to be hated by the princess. My fate will be decided by Princess Peenia. I will obediently follow your will. I calmly said, pretending as if nothing was wrong. It was a bit disappointing, but groveling at her feet would only backfire. The more cornered and desperate one looked, the easier it was for people to think of them as useless and a mess. Princess Peenia was known as the Princess of Benevolence, due to her unique eyes. Eyes that gave insight into the depths of people's humanity. She grew up recognizing when she was being told words of flattery, lip service, and malicious deceptions. Hidden within a princess with seemingly infinite benevolence were the eyes of a monarch capable of weighing human nature with a glance. I turned to look at my campfire, the burning firewood turning into ashes. I could use ignite to light it again, but I hadn't properly trained my body yet. I didn't want to use magic for no reason. I walked past the princess and sat by the fire, stirring the embers with a stick to collect the scattered pieces back into the hearth. You have been here for 3 days now. I have to do what I can to live. I've decided on a definite rule. The best way to not receive attention was to not give anyone attention. I didn't care what others did. If I kept this attitude, they would probably stop paying attention to me as well. But the fact that this was the third princess of the empire had brought tremendous anxiety. Although compared to crying and begging on my knees, this was a strategy that had the potential to succeed. Please don't pay me any mind, princess. However, I knew that this alone was not enough. I heard the step every royal takes as noble. Even for short walks, dozens of servants were said to follow. Even half-day outings required the presence of heavily armed guards. Bribery and flattery were necessary. Nevertheless, there was an issue. If you had nothing to offer, your words would be nothing more than cheap flattery. The sun is just about to set, and the noble Princess Pinia is traveling alone in the dangerous northern forest. I suppose there must be a reason for that. Even when she was walking around the academy, her servants followed and waited on her wherever she went. In this situation, she must have had her guards with her, hiding among the trees with weapons in their hands. It was obvious that any wrong move toward the princess would have dire consequences. What are you trying to say? If you want to harm me since I don't have a knight with me, you will regret that decision. Then I guess I could try saying things a bit more boldly. I smiled. Professor Glast's class assignment examination is rumored to be viciously tough among the second years. He's a professor who likes to make students suffer in quite unique ways each year. I'm guessing you must be taking his exam right now. I didn't even look at the princess and continued poking at the campfire. If you go to the lake southeast of the forest, you will find a small rocky island in the middle of it. The size can only fit about one grown pine tree. That tree is the guardian tree of Merelda. If you look inside the tree, you're bound to have a good harvest. What did you say? Either way, you will search through the entire forest anyway. It won't hurt to stop by. I could feel the princess glaring at my back. Even though it felt like she was burning a hole through me, I pretended not to care. What are you planning? Do you still want to get revenge? As I told you, I just want to continue attending Sylvania. The campfire crackled with a spark as I barely managed to revive the fire. It can be considered a bribe that I'm offering the princess. I finally threw the stick I'd been using into the fire. If you don't like it, there's nothing I can do if you won't take it. The princess glared at me for a long time. She later left after scolding me that whatever I was planning wasn't funny. Well, the princess's move was now out of my hands. Let go of me. Don't you know who I am? I am Ed Roths-Taylor, the second son of the Roths-Taylor family. Get your dirty hands off me, you pigs. Just where are you touching me? Taily. Ha, a low-ranking failure of a student who's all talk. Princess. The benevolent Princess Pinia. My apologies, I didn't notice the princess. Princess. If you defend bugs like Taily, your noble and high name will be tarnished. Please punish him. This is wrong. This is a trap. A setup. That trash Taily is just jealous. That filthy bug. Is he even the same person? As Princess Pinia walked through the forest, she recalled what she saw during the entrance exam. She remembered a vain nobleman who tried to force out Taily, a student who eventually failed, by tampering with his test. That Ed Roths-Taylor was such a pathetic and ugly human being that the princess didn't even need to use her unique, insightful eyes. Anyone could tell that he was an arrogant and unsightly man. He grovels in front of those with power and becomes cruel to the weak. When the princess hid her identity at first, she was also a victim of such rudeness. She believed that such a person shouldn't belong in Sylvania, so she made a move herself. Even though Princess Pinia was still just a student, the Academic Affairs Committee couldn't thoughtlessly ignore her opinion. After all, she held a position within the royal family. 3 days have passed since Ed Roths-Taylor's evil misdeeds were revealed and his family excommunicated him. The way he talked had become much more poised. It may be true that 3 days should be enough time for a person to reflect on oneself and change. Though honestly, I didn't have time to pay attention to that right now. The problem she needed to focus on is the class assignment examination. The infamously evil Professor Glast's exam of searching for the magic-infused marbles. Students were tasked to find the marbles scattered throughout the northern forest and then return to the faculty building. The test started just after noon and continued on until now as the sun had almost completely set. Of the 310 new students of the magic department, about 290 of them had already found marbles and had returned to the faculty building. More than half of the students returned with a marble within the first hour. Only a few students remained searching the northern forest until sunset. Princess Peenia had actually found marbles almost immediately. Having basic magic power detection abilities would enable anyone to find as many as possible. The princess already found a lot of marbles, between leaves, near piles of dirt, under a small wooden bench. But something felt strange. The number of magic-infused marbles was higher than the number of students. It wasn't more than just a few, it was several times more. Even though it was only the first test since getting accepted, it felt way too easy. The exam itself was too kind to have been given by Professor Glast, who was infamously known for being an evil professor. It was obvious there was a hidden intention. That fact wouldn't leave the princess's mind. Most of the students quickly returned to the faculty building, assuming the exam was a first-come, first-served basis. When the sun began to set, the students who were skeptical of the exam's easy difficulty also began to return without finding an answer. It was interesting to see them return with a good number of marbles, focusing on quantity rather than quality. The moon was now in the sky. Nevertheless, Princess Peenia didn't return to the faculty building. She constantly thought that there must be some hidden intention within the test. After walking for a while, she ended up at the lake. There, she saw the rock island that Ed Roths-Taylor mentioned. A pine tree mysteriously sat in the middle of the lake under the moonlit sky. According to him, that tree was the guardian tree of Merelda. Princess Peenia held her chin as she thought it over for a while. Eventually, she gathered magic power at the tip of her toes. Water walking. It was a spell that consumed a lot of power, allowing the user to walk on water. But due to its poor magic power efficiency, it was hard to maintain for a long time. Thus, it was not a very practical skill in battle. However, in this case, it should suffice for the short lengths of the princess could cross without getting wet. Princess Peenia slowly walked across the surface of the lake and noticed that part of the tree had fallen off. Perhaps Ed Roths-Taylor was still set on revenge and had set a trap. If he were to do such a thing against the benevolent princess, things wouldn't end well for him. Ed Roths-Taylor should be well aware of that. But there was nothing wrong with being more careful. The princess cautiously approached the old tree, alert as much as possible. A magic-infused marble, but the color is different. There was a bright golden marble in the hollow of the tree, shining softly. Princess Peenia tilted her head. It's a unique design, it's golden in color and gives off a subtle glow, but there's nothing else to it. Just in case, she tried to detect the marble's magic power, but the amount of magic itself was very insignificant. It was hardly noticeable, although, it seems like an object with some meaning. The princess swept her platinum blonde hair up and lowered herself, careful not to have her well-managed hair touch the ground. Crouching down, she looked at the marble stuck in the tree and thought about taking it. I can't do that. She only discovered the marble because Ed Roths-Taylor told her where it was. The princess herself had not discovered it. Therefore, her pride wouldn't allow her to take the marble for herself. In the end, Princess Peenia decided to leave the lake. She knew all too well how shameless it would be to pass the test in such an unjust way. Chapter 5, 6 days before school starts. 1. Newly crafted product. Low-grade fishing rod. Made from a tree branch polished by a dagger, repurposed silk threads from fabric, and a small nail as a replacement for a hook. It has poor durability. Difficult to determine whether a fish has bitten or not due to the lack of a fishing float. Production difficulty level 1. Open double angle bracket. Production completed. Production skills have increased. Close double angle bracket. I realized that the biggest drawback to harpoon fishing was the fact that it required too much energy. So I thought about using a fishing rod and made one instead. There were a lot of branches for me to use, so I just chose the one closest to the right size. I then found a fabric among my belongings made of silk. I pulled a few threads out and layered them to use as the fishing line. I also had to take one of the small nails attaching the hinge of one of my wooden suitcases. I ended up breaking one of the bags as I didn't have a claw hammer to take it out. In the end, I had a fishing rod, low grade as it may be. For bait, I was able to obtain earthworms from under the rocks near the stream. With everything ready, I threw the line into the water. I sat down by the stream and waited for a fish to bite. It wasn't so bad sitting down waiting, chin in my hand. Compared to running around in the water and getting drenched, this felt as though I have become some sort of god. It would be great if this succeeds. I remembered when I was young, running around the mountains and streams in my childhood. I had no worries back then, no fear of dying from hunger. I was able to just be happy. Thinking back on those times made me feel emotional for some reason. I don't think I did anything wrong. I thought of pointless things as I held onto my fishing rod, wondering if I made the right decision telling Princess Peenia about the golden marble. I should be more careful next time. My biggest advantage was knowing everything that would happen at Sylvania Academy in the future. But if I were to do something useless and end up changing the future, then wouldn't I have just thrown away my own advantage? According to what I knew, Princess Peenia wasn't supposed to find the golden marble. If it were to follow the story, the person who was supposed to find the location of that marble was someone named Lazy Lucy. She was a talented person who always placed first in the magic department, starting from the class assignment examination all the way to graduation. Well, in my defense, that was the only plan I could come up with in that dire situation. It couldn't be helped. The more pressing matter was to make sure that Princess Peenia wouldn't expel me from school. I knew desperately begging and appealing to her emotions would be the worst thing I could do. While the best thing was to make her strangely suspicious of me so she feels that she shouldn't kick me out of the academy. It wasn't the most convenient choice, but I thought it wouldn't be too dangerous. Although it was an unusual stance to take. If someone were to ask me what kind of bullshit excuse I was saying, well, I would have nothing else to say. I mean, it's not that difficult to talk crap, to be honest. Professor Glast was known as the rude skull-faced bastard amongst the students. It wasn't unusual for students to give teachers mean nicknames. However, even Professor Glast's nickname could be considered a bit too harsh. Although the reason for it was rather accurate, the professor was both rude and resembled a skeleton. I will announce the results of yesterday's class assignment examination. The busiest and most well-maintained area was Phyllis Hall, located in the southeast part of the island. All the freshman students from the magic department sat waiting while Professor Glast was on the podium. He had a scrawny and pale appearance. And due to his neatly slicked back light green hair, his bony facial features were more prominent. First off, all of you, brats, who came back within the first hour will all start in Class F. The entire hall became noisy at his words. Next, all of you, brats, who thought for a bit then brought back lots of marbles, you still have room for improvement, at the very least. Depending on the type of marbles you brought, you will be assigned to a class ranging from Class E to Class D. Looking down on the students and having the attitude to keep calling them brats was already quite rude. Among these students are famous aristocrats, powerful and wealthy people, and even royalty, and yet, he didn't care. It was law in Sylvania Academy. When it comes to education, the hierarchy shouldn't be important. It was considered separate from the lifestyle and personal relationships of the students. Learning was an even playing field. There are only 3 students accepted into Class A where they will be guaranteed the highest level of treatment and education: Lortel, Lucy, and Ziggs. Among them is Lucy, who came on top of the class. As for the rest of you, you can check your position on the list I distributed. I do not accept appeals. That will be all. After his speech, chaos ensued once again. Professor Glast tried to come down from the podium, dusting off the fabric of his robe. What is the meaning of this? I can't accept this. The criteria wasn't even clear. Did you just randomly assign our classes? Please explain yourself. What were the intentions of this test and what skills did you want to see? Some students loudly complained amidst the commotion. Professor Glast went back to the podium, as if he had already expected this reaction, and cast voice expansion on himself. The intention, why should I have to explain any of that? Everyone was shocked by his words. Princess Peenia was shocked herself. The princess looked at the issued list and was left speechless. The freshmen were divided into 6 levels, Class F to Class A. Only 3 students made it into Class A and not a single student made it into Class B or C. The remaining students were all split into Class D, E, and F. Princess Peenia's name was listed under Class D. And even then, she couldn't believe that her rank was already in the top 10%. If you want to get into a higher class, then prove your ability. That's what you need to do. The situation was more ridiculous than the princess had thought. She felt humiliated but soon shook her head. Before the entrance ceremony, the headmaster already talked about this. Once she entered Sylvania Academy, there would be many cases where she would not be treated comparably to her authority as a princess. It was Princess Peenia herself who decided to escape her grand but impractical training room to learn magic at Sylvania Academy on equal footing with everyone else. She was ready to accept this humiliation. But she still needed to understand. Even then, at the very least, you can explain the situation a bit more, Sir Glast. The words left her lips. She didn't raise her voice, but the murmuring ceased at once. Everyone was already aware that here with them was a princess of the kingdom. As a student, she temporarily placed the importance of her status behind her, but she couldn't completely erase her inherent noble nature. Princess Peenia, I'm sorry to say this, but this is my education policy. A cold gaze. She had felt that very same gaze from the many vassals who sat next to the king, vassals who were knowledgeable in their abilities and ways. Professor Glast's eyes contained that same specific coldness. Using her insightful eyes, she could definitely see it, a feeling that she felt so often that she was already sick and tired of it. But, if Princess Peenia says so, I will make an exception just this one time. And that attitude of willingly ignoring his own rules was also similar. However, even if I tell you, I just know you will all misunderstand and say I made the reason up. To prevent this, I will have the top student explain it instead. Lucy Mariel. Lucy. The professor called Lucy's name but there was no answer. Ms. Lucy. She should be here right now. Ms. Lucy. Another commotion broke out as the students looked around, trying to find where Luxie was. Ah, Hugh. Just then, the girl sitting 2 seats ahead of Princess Peenia reacted. She looked a bit disoriented. The witch hat that covered her face was much bigger than her head, so much so that even her shoulders were covered. Her frame was so small that even the sleeves of her robes were hanging off her arms. Were you dozing off? Ah, yes, I dozed off. Her voice itself sounded drowsy, coupled with her droopy eyes that made her look tired. She even admitted that she had dozed off. She was clearly one of those weirdos. Would you like to come up to the podium for a moment and discuss the intention and methods you used to solve the test? Lucy's eyes shook at the professor's suggestions. It was obvious she was annoyed. Do I have to do it, now? Tension filled the air at her words. She just openly said, it's bothersome, in front of Professor Glass, someone who was known to be extremely rude. However, some of the students who had heard certain rumors about Professor Glass weren't very surprised at his answer. That's right. Uwek. The professor was extremely harsh to the untalented but was merciful to those who are. Professor Glass was that kind of person. Kagish, ACKK. Hyuk. Lucy threw her wide-brimmed witch hat to the empty seat next to her. She stretched both her arms and legs wide apart like a baby cat who just woke up from a deep nap. She stood up like a caterpillar. Although it would be more apt to say she looked like a sloth. You may answer there if you don't want to come all the way here. Just explain how you found the golden marble in the Guardian Tree of Merelda. If you don't want to come all the way to the podium, you may answer there. You can just explain how you found the golden marble in the Guardian Tree of Merelda. Ah, really? This should be quick then. Half sitting on her chair, Lucy began to explain as if it were nothing. It's what Glocked, the Archmage, defined, the three qualities of an Archmage who seeks truth. Magic resonance, quick and accurate judgment, and the will to explore. You wanted to check if we had these qualities, right? The name that was written the largest in all magic history textbooks was that of the Archmage Glocked. The qualities of an Archmage he defined were quite well known. I was just taking a nap nearby, and when I woke up, the sun was already setting. So I just gathered the magic marbles that I could sense around me. The students began to lose interest as Lucy mumbled on. However, Professor Glast was still waiting patiently for her to finish. Of course, no one else could have located that marble except for me. Her words sounded arrogant, but the way she said it couldn't be considered as such. The tone she used to explain was nothing but reciting an obvious fact, like the sun rising in the east or a glass cup breaking if it fell to the ground. She stated her words as if it was nothing special. As she continued to elaborate through her drowsiness, the other students felt a sense of incompatibility. A genius. Someone that can't be explained logically. Lucy Mariel was someone who was born with innate talent. And those like her would surely manifest their unique prowess. Chapter 6. 6 days before school starts. 2. Sylvania Academy's royal accommodations were located in the western part of Akan Island. Amongst them was one perched at the edge of a cliff closest to the coast. It was quite far away from the commercial district in the southwest, where various amenities and small business facilities were located. When it came to academics, the royal family were treated as equals to other students, but they cannot be treated the same when it came to their lifestyle and residences. This was the reason a royal accommodation was built solely for Princess Peenia. The grand mansion was quite spacious. Regular students weren't even allowed to enter its garden, attesting to how much special treatment the royal family received in the academy. It's very different from the academic district. The sun was setting. Looking out the window, there was a vast view of the ocean. The subtle sound of the waves could be heard from the windowsill, filling up the entirety of the princess's enormous private quarters. Princess Peenia sat at her desk as she watched the sunset from her window. It was a personal desk made from high-quality wood, engraved with intricate patterns. It was even larger than Headmaster Obel's own desk. In every way, the royal family's life had to always be one of extreme opulence. It was a life completely different from that of a regular student in the academic district. Princess Peenia swept her neat platinum blonde hair in front of her left shoulder. She opened her magic history and elemental book but soon put her pen down. Quote. The princess was lost in thought. The golden marble that Lucy Mariel showed during the class assignment examination announcement was definitely the marble she found inside the guardian tree of Merelda. She came to a realization. The marble looked unique, but there was nothing strange about it other than that. You could barely feel the magic power inside of it because it was so weak. Indeed, Princess Peenia's judgment was correct. The marble really was nothing more than a marble with a unique appearance and a small amount of magic power. However, the fact that it was filled with weak magic power was the key itself. Not bad, Ms. Lucy. The three qualities of an archmage who covets the truth as the Archmage Glock defined. Magic resonance, quick and accurate judgment, the will to explore. The students who jumped to the conclusion that the test was judged on a first come, first serve basis were deducted points in the quick and accurate judgment aspect. What determined the top performers was those who did well in magic power resonance, judged by the amount of magic power in each marble. The smaller the amount, the harder they were to detect. Now that Princess Peenia thought back on it, there were different amounts of magic power in each of the various marbles that were spread out. But the difference was so minimal that it was difficult to even notice if the princess hadn't focused. The more marbles found with less magic power inside, the more extra points in the magic power resonance aspect. And the golden marble that Lucy Mariel casually found after she woke up from her nap. The guardian tree of Merelda is the oldest tree in the northern forest. It's a tree protected by Merelda, a high-ranking wind spirit, so it's always surrounded by abundant magic. Professor Glast said at the podium, talking with his unique skull-like face. In a small space where there is an abundance of magic power present, I placed a marble with the smallest amount of magic power infused into it. Even the location was just a rock island in the middle of a lake. Unless you were a student who was able to sense that minuscule magic power, it was a place that you wouldn't have found. There was no end to the intricacies of magic power resonance. The same way a person's scent would be impossible to distinguish in a crowd, it was harder to notice unique magic power when mixed or buried among others. Lucy Mariel was born with the ability to push her magic power resonance to the limit. Not only that, she was dozing off, acting like she didn't know anything, when she actually understood Professor Glast's intentions already. Evident in the fact that she came back to the academic district with nothing more than that golden marble. It meant Lucy Mariel was already on top of the field. All right, I can understand that. It was the first time the princess heard the name Lucy Mariel. However, it turned out she was already quite well known amongst the others. Lazy Lucy. She could be seen around campus curled up on benches, tree stumps, or even on the grass field taking a nap. Her origins were unknown, but it was rumored she was already a genius, able to push her sense of magic power to the limit. It was a truly enviable talent, but it's a talent that she was born with. It's something that could just be accepted as unfair. But there was still a part she couldn't understand. There was one more person who knew where the marble was. That tree is the guardian tree of Merelda. If you look inside the tree, you're bound to have a good harvest. Ed Roth's Taylor. Princess Peenia felt deeply troubled. This meant he also knew the location of the golden marble, something that couldn't be explained as an accidental discovery. The marble only held a small amount of magic power, in a space surrounded by powerful magic power from the guardian tree of Merelda. It was also located on a rocky island in the middle of a lake. It's not a place that one can find on accident while walking about. Therefore, there was only one conclusion to be drawn. Ed Roth's Taylor was born with the same level of magic sensitivity as Lucy Mariel. Let go of me. Do you know who I am? I am Ed Roth's Taylor, the second son of the Roth's Taylor family. Get your dirty hands off me, you pigs. Where do you think you are touching me? You think I would stoop so low just to mess with a nobody failure like Taylor? Let go of me, these dirty and ignorant commoners. Do you even know what you're talking about? What? Princess. The benevolent Princess Peenia. I'm sorry, I didn't notice you. I'm sorry, Princess. I'll punish myself and hit my head like this. Please, please show your mercy, Princess. If you defend bugs like Taylor, your noble and high name will be tarnished. Please condemn him. It can't be. Princess Peenia shook her head. Ever since she could remember, she had lived judging others. The disgraceful appearance that Ed Roth's Taylor exhibited at the entrance exam was something anyone would recognize as a last-ditch effort of someone backed to a corner. The princess heard that his magical abilities were nothing exceptional. Rather, it was a mystery why he was so arrogant when he had nothing to boast about. It was probably because of the Roth's Taylor family's unique training method. But more than that, Professor Glast wouldn't have left him alone if he had that much talent. The professor was someone who was madly obsessed with talent, so much so that he would find hidden talents among students and help them bloom. There was no way the professor wouldn't have noticed his level of talent. However, the uncomfortable feeling persisted in Princess Peenia. Was he really the same person? There wasn't a sense of relief or that of convincing. More than anything, there was something about that calm side of Ed Roth's Taylor in the forest. His shameful attitude, trembling in fear and unable to hide his sense of awe. In the face of power, of becoming weak in front of someone powerful, she didn't feel it at all. She thought he was bluffing at first, but seeing his actions changed her mind. Ed Roth's Taylor seemed more concerned about the campfire extinguishing rather than the angry Princess Peenia in front of him. He sat by the campfire and talked, kindling the firewood with his poker. He didn't look at the princess even once. She felt a sense of discomfort. A sense of discomfort from the fact that this might not be the same person. But the appearance and behavior he exhibited as an arrogant aristocrat that Princess Peenia saw at the entrance exam, that was real. Was there a chance that he just changed? The biggest chance for him to change was probably after being disowned. But even when she thought about it, it seemed too strange. She was the reason Ed Roth's Taylor was disowned. He should have either blamed her or begged her for forgiveness. If he did, the princess wouldn't be feeling this strange unease. However, this new Ed Rothsayler's eyes held no such unjust feelings. The eyes that Princess Peenia had seen. Indifference. Apathy. A good impression. He even appeared to be relaxed. The fact that these were the feelings in the eyes of someone who had just been thrown away by aristocracy, the princess thought it was unrealistic. No way, was he not in shock over what happened to him? No, Princess Peenia shook her head. He lived as a member of the Rothsayler family his whole life. No matter how calm and composed of a person he may be, there was no way being disowned from the comfortable life he had been living thus far wouldn't be shocking. Closing her magic book, Princess Peenia fell deep into her thoughts. What kind of family were the Rothsaylers? The person to come to mind would be Kreppen Rothsayler, whom the princess first met at a royal banquet. He was a wonderful nobleman with a warm-hearted smile, dressed neatly and was stylish in appearance. But that was through the eyes of the young Princess Peenia. Because her insightful eyes, which were gifted by God like a sixth sense, gave her the ability to measure a person's being, and they saw something different. Inside the benevolent noble head of the house, Kreppen Rothsayler had something that the princess couldn't explain well with words. A black and unpleasant snake living in the pit of his stomach. Behind the perfect example of a kind ruler was something hiding in the shadows. Every once in a while, the princess would notice his face darken as he leaves the royal conference hall. He was a villain wearing the mask of an innocent nobleman. Princess Peenia had been sure about this for a long time. There were even private troops secretly sent to investigate the family, seemingly hiding a darkness that no one knew. There was a rumor that items would occasionally go missing at the annual Royal Treasury meeting, only to turn up later. There was also a rumor that a staff member who worked at the family's mansion went missing. And a rumor that Kreppen Rothsayler indulged in books about the god of destruction. Something suspicious was going on. However, the basis for this speculation was not enough. Princess Peenia suddenly stopped fiddling with her pen. Her insightful eyes that measured a person had never been wrong in her entire life. No matter how unusual it may be, if her sixth sense was going haywire, then there must be something going on. But this was only a hypothetical, what if? Even though her sixth sense could sense it, the Rothsayler family's misdeeds were yet to be revealed. What if Ed Rothsayler was trying to leave that darkness? It would explain how he could remain so calm despite being disowned by his own family. It's because he was trying to naturally cut off his ties from said family. However, it wasn't easy to leave the blood lineage of the aristocracy. If he wanted to be disowned naturally, he would have to leave behind a destroyed reputation. Princess Peenia's face stiffened at the realization. More than anything, if this was true. Let go of me. Do you know who I am? I am Ed Rothsayler, the second son of the Rothsayler family. Get your dirty hands off me, you pigs. Where do you think you are touching me? You think I would stoop so low just to mess with a nobody failure like Taily? Let go of me, these dirty and ignorant commoners. Do you even know what you're talking about? Then even that ugliness he showed, that worst part of human nature he exhibited during the entrance examination, that meant it was all acting. This meant he had a different type of inner strength that even her insightful eyes couldn't see. In other words, he was a mastermind manipulator who even used the princess of the kingdom for his own purpose. That was all acting. The princess quickly shook her head no. That can't be true. However, the change in Ed Rothsayler constantly bothered Princess Peenia. If what she saw was acting. If he knew something about the darkness of the Rothsayler family. If he used the princess to cut ties with that darkness. If all of this was planned in the palm of his hand. If that's true, slam. This is too exhausting. The princess pushed herself up from the table. She went to the window and was greeted by the cool sea breeze, her platinum blonde hair refreshingly flying in the wind. The feeling helped cool her head. I should catch up on the admission schedule and my studies, I can't afford to pay attention to state affairs. Go enjoy the happiness of learning. That was the encouragement the king gave her when she left for the academy. She had been able to shed and escape some of the rules and mannerisms of being royalty in Sylvania, a place for her to study. She should let go of these thoughts now. A life full of politics, power struggles between aristocrats, caring for the people, and diplomacy with international nations. The princess was starting to get tired of it all. Maybe she was already tired. She was just overestimating Ed Roth's Taylor. Not everyone lived their life hidden inside layers of masks. Perhaps this had become a bad habit for the princess, measuring a person due to living life walking a tightrope amongst aristocrats and ministers. Physically, Princess Peenia was just a foolish girl who was yet to have her coming-of-age ceremony. But her heart felt as though it had become old. Besides, she wasn't even at the age that she should be measuring others, but rather at a time when she should be focusing on herself. The princess sighed as the wind whistled by. Did I mature too early for my age? She looked at the mirror by the window. A beautiful platinum blonde princess who grew up well cared for stood in the mirror wearing light sleepwear. She gathered her hair and rolled it up, then she tried splitting it in the middle and tying her hair in pigtails, and then she tried tying everything to one side. But by then, she let out a big sigh and let go of her hair. It's not that I'm not interested in dressing up, but I don't know why I get so embarrassed about it. Authority sometimes bound a person. Since she was in a position of authority, the fatigue was indescribable. But it couldn't be helped. To some people, the princess's position looked like a blessing. I'm always thinking too deeply and too hard about everything, it might have become a bad habit. Princess Peenia still kept thinking as she stood by the window, feeling the wind. She stood there thinking about Ed Roth's Taylor. Knowing the dark secret of the Roth's Taylor family, he deliberately used the princess to get himself disowned and break ties with his family. The assumption was too absurd. It made sense if she were to stitch together various pieces, but it was too much of a leap in terms of logic. But his attitude had strangely changed and did a 180 degrees. Let's just think he went crazy because he got disowned. He also found the location of the golden marble before Lucy Mariel and told Princess Peenia. That is, I don't know, he must have found it by chance. On the contrary, it felt too convenient. Princess Peenia was aware of that fact, but she also felt relieved, having had reasoned it out for herself. When we had a conversation before, I didn't feel anything dark from inside of him. Princess Peenia's face froze. The conversation she had with him in the northern forest. She forgot how natural their conversation flowed. As soon as she saw him, she immediately snapped at him. Get out of this school. People here despise you. Don't you also despise this school as well? Don't you hate me for getting you disowned? How did Ed Roth's Taylor respond to that? With a surprised reaction, he stared at Princess Peenia and said a reason that nobody would believe. The truth is, Princess, I actually feel grateful towards you. Stuck in such a bizarre situation, she couldn't ask the significance behind those words. Just what was he thankful for? Princess Peenia was the person who had the biggest influence in getting him excommunicated. Just what was there to be thankful for to such an enemy? Was getting disowned something to be thankful for? Quote. Slowly, Princess Peenia stopped. Crackle. She could hear the occasional crackling of the campfire, as if experiencing an auditory hallucination. There wasn't a lot the princess saw that day. The only thing she saw was the wide back of a boy rekindling firewood with his poker, as if he was enjoying what he was doing. Whoosh! I caught it. It was my 7th catch. The fishing rod I made in a hurry was performing better than I thought. The freshwater fish I just caught looked similar to bluegill and was already my 7th catch. With this much, it wouldn't only be to stave off my hunger, but it should be enough to eat until I'm full. I was always hungry, but after coming to this terrible world for the first time, it looked like I might finally be able to feel satisfied. So satisfied that I couldn't help but give a thumbs up. What a great catch. Chapter 7, 3 days before school starts. 1. Hearing the cicadas chirping among the grass was nice. The moonlight reflected on the water at night creates a relaxing atmosphere. I was cleaning the fish I caught in front of the crackling campfire. I worked a lot the past 3 days just to survive. My once shabby living space had become quite decent. First was my shelter, which was made with wood, clothes, and leaves. I had now reinforced it with clay from the river, filling the gaps connecting the support beams and making them sturdier. The gaps on the roof were also neatly covered. Even if it rained, there probably won't be any leakage. However, the support didn't look like it could withstand the added weight of the clay. I had to reinforce it with more wood, adding volume to my shelter. And as for food, I found rock salt downstream of the river leading up to the coast. I then ground some fragments into smaller pieces and used it to season my food. I also found a large flat stone by the river and used it as a grill. I'm slowly getting the hang of it. I couldn't catch bigger fish with just a low-grade fishing rod. Usually, I would only catch small fish like Japanese rice fish, but sometimes I would reel in a bluegill fish that I could actually eat. I had also become quite good at preparing fish. Using the ceremonial dagger that had now become my trusty companion, I cut through the fish belly and removed its guts. After that, I dragged the blade across the skin to descale it, and then scored through the flesh to let the seasoning seep well into the meat. I then sprinkled salt all over it and grilled it on the stone plate. Newly made dish. Grilled bluegill with salt. Bluegill caught in the river that was cleaned and then grilled with salt. It's simple, but the tastes of the ingredients are incorporated well together. Production difficulty level 2. Cooking skills have increased. Oh, I obtained something new. There weren't any messages like this when I only caught and roughly grilled my fish. But ever since I started cleaning and preparing the ingredients, seasoning and cooking them properly, my cooking skill began to improve. This meant the increase in my daily life production skills reflected on my level as well. I took my mirror out and looked at my reflection to check my information window. Name: Ed Roths Taylor. Gender: male. Age: 17. School year: 2nd. Species: human. Achievements: none. Vitality: 3. Intelligence: 4. Dexterity: 8. Willpower: 7. Luck: 6. Combat skills details. Magic skills details. Life skills details. Alchemy skills details. My dexterity increased by a point from 7 to 8. Proficiency in various daily life production skills was extremely important in Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster. This was because skills in cooking, construction, woodworking, pharmaceutical, and other production areas could create a variety of useful items, but were also useful when combined with practical combat abilities. As an example, dexterity was closely connected with a person's sensitivity. It had something to do with being able to detect the subtle flow of energies or movements around you. It had little relation to magic, but it brought us significant differences in swordsmanship, archery, and alchemy. I didn't know when my dexterity increased, but a point was already a great feat. The higher your stats were, the harder it became to raise them. Although it may not take long to raise low stats like 3 or 4 to a 7 or 8, you would need to complete a legendary quest just to earn a point once you reach the 20s. Most of the daily life production skills were closely linked to dexterity. Combat skills were affected by vitality, dexterity, and willpower. Magic skills were influenced by intelligence, willpower, and luck. Life skills were from dexterity and willpower. While alchemy skills needed intelligence and luck. It may seem unnecessarily complicated, but the key thing to remember was that each skill was affected by different stats. I tasted a piece of fish. As it was seasoned well, it was really delicious. I drank a few gulps of water from the stream and sat down on a large rock I've been using as a substitute for a chair. I still have a lot of work to do. The wooden shelter was uncomfortable at first, but it somehow became cozy as the days went by. I still had a lot of extra clothes left. When it came to food, I had somehow survived by catching fish and foraging nuts and berries from the forest. I wouldn't say my standard of living is high, but it sure could improve little by little. I need a drying rack to wash my clothes, but how do I make something like that? If I go to the library in the academic district, wouldn't I find some related books about it? And I don't want to only rely on fishing and gathering, I want to hunt too. While walking around in the forest yesterday, I chanced upon a wild boar roaming around. Apart from it, there were also plenty of wild animals such as rabbits and squirrels. Since the academy had to be built on Akan Island, a large-scale monster subjugation took place first. It would be hard to find monsters that could count as a threat to human life now, but there were quite a few wild animals that lived in the forests, naturally belonging in nature. Hunting wouldn't be a choice, but a necessity. Meat was about supply and demand, but if I were to collect oil from the animal I caught, the quality of my cooking would greatly increase. Come to think of it, I need some cooking utensils. The tools I had were all ceremonial items used at academic events: a ceremonial dagger, an iron bowl, and a mirror. These things were usually kept neatly, but at this point, I didn't have the leisure to pay attention to such empty formalities. The ceremonial dagger had already gone through all sorts of hardships, and there was no reason to keep the bowl and mirror neat. It was something that couldn't be helped. It'd be so convenient if I just had something like a pot, a proper kitchen knife, a ladle, or at least a plate for the food. Using a twig, I wrote down the necessary items I could think of on the ground. I didn't have money and couldn't leave the island right away, but if I were somehow able to obtain the funds, these were the things I really wanted to buy. I still have so many things left to do, but there are only 3 days left before school starts, UGHH. I let out a deep sigh and stretched. At least I had enough tools to live with. This past week, I worked hard to build a place I could call my own. It could now be considered something like a camp. The wooden shelter that I put my most effort into. A campfire surrounded by small rocks to manage it efficiently. On top of that, a large stone plate that I used in place of a cooking grill. Along with these things was the neatly arranged luggage I brought from Offellis Hall. There were also quite a few other items I made by myself that I had organized separately. Then for today, let's try making a bow using some silk threads. The silk I found in my luggage had been a huge help. It looked like a luxury product that I almost shed tears as I unraveled the fabric. The fishing line was made with that silk, and I also used it to tie and close the fabric on my roof. The silk was of high quality and was quite durable. If I twist it well, it would be usable in a bow. I also found an appropriately sized piece of wood in the forest for the bow itself. Making and learning how to use a bow would be a huge help. Most importantly, archery had good compatibility with both magic and dexterity. That was because various magical modifications could be applied to the arrows, greatly increasing their power. If I could increase my proficiency with a bow and arrow, I would see a direct growth in my abilities. Based on my experience, hastily learning a skill resulted in inferior proficiency. It was easy to fall out of balance. Prevention was better than cure. No matter how busy I may be, I needed to make sure I did all the necessary preparations first. I think it's going to be another long night. Shrugging my shoulders, I got myself ready to go back into production mode. I guessed I would be sleeping late today once again. Dean McDowell smiled contentedly as he swept his mustache. It had been a while since he laughed like this. The position as Dean of the Magic Department at Sylvania Academy was hard and difficult to endure for a gentle soul like him. There were many eccentric students that dominated the academy, but even the professors had big egos. Trying to mediate in the middle of it all, getting swept here and there, had made his once shiny black hair start turning white. The deans of the combat department and alchemy department didn't seem to suffer nearly as much. It looked to be that the magic department was just particularly difficult. But there were times when he felt like he was being rewarded. He smiled as he looked through the results of the freshman class assignment. The lineup this year was truly a gold mine. Even though he had become old, the brilliant glow of these talented gemstones made his heart flutter. First of all, it was a good sign that Professor Glast assigned 3 students to Class A. Professor Glast, who shakes his head, not only at students but even at high-ranking professors, recognized as many as 3 students. Spear from Nature Ziggs, whose talents had blossomed even in the harsh northern grasslands. The greatest merchant in the continent that led the Elt Company, the Golden King, Elt Kehalan's only child, the Golden Daughter Lortel. And the one whose origins and past was unknown, the girl who made Professor Glast applaud with just her overwhelming talent, Lazy Lucy. Dean McDowell couldn't help but be surprised at Professor Glast's praise for Lucy Mariel. She was born with the qualities of an archmage who will make a new mark in the history of magic. I am honored to be her teacher. Taking into consideration how Professor Glast had looked at many magicians who had been called prodigies before with cold and distant eyes, and looking at his words and actions now, Dean McDowell couldn't even begin to imagine what kind of talent Lucy Mariel had. Compared to last year, this year's freshmen were a great harvest. There were barely any students who stood out from last year's freshmen. Only Yenika, who succeeded in signing a contract with a high-ranking spirit, caught his attention. Rather, their average scores were on the decline. They even had a student who was excommunicated for interfering with this year's freshman entrance exam. It was a batch of students that could be considered the worst generation. Last year must have been really grim for the sake of this year. McDowell was about to sign the report, hoping that Sylvania's great name could be raised once again. "Dean, please wait a moment, a guest has arrived." His secretary knocked on his office door. He had told her not to let anyone in unless they had scheduled a meeting in advance, but it seemed as if she had already forgotten. McDowell sighed and was about to reprimand her when the door swung open without his approval. It was Claire, the royal knight, and head escort under the direct control of Princess Peenia. With the door open, the princess herself came in, dressed in a dark blue dress. Dean McDowell was scared out of his wits. He bowed his head and tried to honor the royal family, only to quickly stop himself. This was the academic district in Sylvania. It was a place where the virtue of learning took precedence over the status of nobles. Outside of the academic district, there would be people bowing their heads in front of the authority of the royal family. But here, Dean McDowell was considered Princess Peenia's professor. He couldn't treat the princess carelessly, but he had to at least act as a teacher and treat her as a student. This was the policy of the emperor who founded Sylvania Academy. Dean McDowell ended his courtesy by carefully bowing his head. "I can't believe the princess has traveled all the way to the academic district at this hour. And for what reason did you come, princess?" "I am sorry I didn't contact you in advance, Professor McDowell." Despite her petite frame, Princess Peenia faced him with an intimidating aura. She modestly sat down on the sofa meant for guests while the head escort Claire and the two other royal knights stood firm. "There's something I wanted to discuss. Will that be okay?" The benevolent Princess Peenia was not one to use her authority to pressure others. McDowell knew about that fact quite well. So what could her reason be for recklessly coming into his office to ask him for a discussion? Either way, Dean McDowell had no choice but to listen to what she had to say. Chapter 8, The Day Before School Starts 1. Now, what should I do? In the middle of a small lake in the southeastern part of the forest is a rocky island where, the guardian tree of Merelda, stands. I found the elementalist Yennecar lost in thought there, concentrating while leaning against the tree. Before I knew it, the start of school was only a day away. I needed to prepare a lot of things. First of which was my unsightly appearance. Spending 10 days in the wild, I looked more like a commoner than I did a noble. Although I did wash in the stream every day, I still needed to shave off my sparsely growing beard. I sharpened the edge of a hinge I removed from my suitcase, scared of actually using it. If I accidentally cut myself with a rusty blade, I could get an infection like tetanus. However, to maintain a low-key academic life at Sylvania, maintaining my dignity was the most basic of basics. My goal was to graduate and remain unnoticed as much as possible. There would be nothing worse than catching the attention of the academic staff for looking like a beggar. I would need to find a way to get a clean razor blade. I got dressed and finished my other preparations for school before finally picking up my bow. Combat skills details. Grade: Combat Beginner. Specialized fields: Bow. Bow proficiency: Level 1. Without hesitation, I decided to specialize in bow mastery for my combat skills. There are 4 skill categories in Sylvania's Failed Swordmaster: Combat, Magic, Life, and Alchemy. It was a system that decides one's profession by combining 2 skill categories. Specializing in combat and magic would enable a student to become a magic swordsman or a magic fighter. Specializing in magic and alchemy would enable a student to become an alchemist or a spiritualist. For a player who is in a position to freely choose their profession, it would be wise to consider their options. But in my case, I was left with no choice for my 2 skill categories. I had to train my life skills in order to survive. I was also in possession of a student's body from the magic department, making magic training inevitable. In other words, specializing in magic and life skills wasn't an option, but a necessity. These two categories weren't a good combination, but there was a possibility of becoming a magic engineer or an enchanter. As I said, there was no weapon I was as compatible with as the bow. It would be hard for me to engage in close combat because I lack endurance, muscle strength, and fast reflexes. Attacking enemies from a distance would be the most ideal strategy. When my proficiency with production skills improved, I would be able to craft high-quality arrows and enchant them with magic. Due to this, the best course of action was for me to specialize in bow mastery for my combat skills and specialize in elementalism for my alchemy skills. Elementalism. However, elementalists were born with an innate ability called spirit resonance. There was a limit to what one can train to interact with spirits. Therefore, historically great elementalists had all been born with this innate ability. I guess it can't be helped if it doesn't work, but that would be a bummer. There weren't many good specializations for alchemy skills. The most I could think of was specializing in herbal medicines. Even then, it would be impossible to force spirit resonance if I didn't have it. If it were not to work out, I would just have to find another way. Anyway, I need to try out this bow I made all night. I was overjoyed when I finished crafting a bow with a production difficulty level as high as level 2, but I was still skeptical if it would work or not. I sharpened the hinges of my suitcases and attached them to wooden sticks to make an arrow. I used all the hinges to make 4. But if I were to be honest, I wasn't sure if I would be able to kill anything with them. They might be useless against large beasts like wild boars, but they might work against smaller animals like squirrels and rabbits. With the bow on my back, I went out to hunt. 2 hours later, after having achieved the result of 2 squirrels, I found Yennecar at the guardian tree of Merelda. At the youngest age, she was able to sign a contract with Taken, a high-ranking fire spirit. She was a talented elementalist currently attending Sylvania Academy as a second-year student. She would later on be controlled by the high-ranking dark spirit Velisper, the right hand of the highest-ranking dark spirit Glaskin. She would then take over the entire student center. She was Sylvania's failed swordmaster's final boss in the first act. Without any ambition, I just wanted to graduate from this academy. That was my best course of action. But truth be told, it wasn't like I didn't have any dreams. It wasn't like I didn't want to be the hero of this world and walk a path of praise from everyone. However, the path a hero would walk on was usually a thorny one. There was a reason they received praises. It was because they silently pressed forward on the thorny path where blood flowed, just as if it was a flower road. The same goes for this word's hero, Taili. No one knows who he was yet, or where he was or what he's doing. But I've played countless times as Taili, so I knew it all too well. With a total of 5 acts and 43 chapters, the story was similar to that of an epic novel. The ordeal that the main character Taili would go through was not something a weak feeble mind could endure. What awaits at the end of his romantic and youthful academy life was the countless suffering of death and formidable and overwhelming enemies. His last semester would be where the scale of his ordeals would increase drastically, with constant threats and pressure on Taili's personal affairs. The pleasure and triumph of overcoming them may be sweet, but I didn't want to go through all of those. Above all, overcoming them didn't always mean that a great reward was waiting. Honor and glory were valuable things, but they never came for free. Instead, a lot of sacrifices had to be made in the process. To know that the path in front was a thorny one, it would be stupid to willingly walk on it. That was my conclusion. Whatever it may be, I would follow the authentic path. The path of Sylvania's failed swordmaster, that I knew. One way or another, Taili, who had been through all kinds of ordeals and tests, would solve all the crises on his own. I would just tell him he was doing a good job and clap for him while I focus on taking care of myself and getting my diploma. And besides, I was 1 year his senior. The storyline of Sylvania's failed swordmaster would get fiercer around the last year when Taili was about to graduate. This was also the climax of the storyline. It was when all kinds of forces outside the academy were in full swing, students were threatened and the atmosphere became desolate. All the students were met with various hardships. The year before that, I just needed to get my diploma and leave. My strategy was to take all the benefits and go find my own life while I leave all the difficulties to the protagonist. Wasn't that the perfect plan? As for this situation, one of the most important characters in the game and the first person to take Taily down Yennecar Polarover. I didn't want to get involved, so I should just go on my way. That was the reasonable course of action. But just as I was about to leave, oh my, isn't that the funny friend Merylda mentioned? Yennecar opened her eyes and spoke to me. Of course, this was my life, where rarely anything ever goes the way I wanted. The entirety of this forest is Merylda's territory. And although she's not a very high-ranking spirit, she talks about everything on her mind. She talked as if the old high-ranking wind spirit that had been protecting this forest even before Sylvania Academy was established was her friend. Her plentiful light pink hair was brushed down well, and both sides of her hair were neatly braided, giving off a warm impression. She was dressed in the standard uniform at Sylvania Academy, a red coat and navy blue skirt. But perhaps, since it was cold, she had a fluffy shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Spread around her were a couple of magic books. She must have been reading while being surrounded by the trees in the forest. I just arrived back at the dorm after the break, but why'd I have so many things to say? I'm admired for having a high-ranking spirit, but I guess I've been lonely without someone to talk to. I don't know how I survived the break, being so bored. She smiled and kept chatting, but from my point of view, this was a dilemma. Because I didn't want to get involved with her, I had to do something when it was with Princess Peenia, as she was directly related to my situation, but this is a completely different story. I guess it can be lonely for anyone, not having someone to talk to. She looked so cozy and sweet with her bright smile, which is why it came as a big shock to players in the first act when she was revealed as the main antagonist. A reliable and warm second-year senior, and yet she took over the student center with the cursed seal of Glasgow all over her body. It was a slap to the back of the head for players who were just starting to adapt to the rules of the world. In fact, it was the point where I got immersed in the story. I couldn't help but say, what the shit, when I played through that part. So, why was she talking to me? Somehow, I felt like I could answer that question myself. I heard you were living in this forest. After being excommunicated, the owner of this forest told you that. Merylda is a bit nosy. She loves this forest after all. With a smile on her face, it seemed like blooming flowers were flying around her. She looked like someone who was always positive no matter how bad the situation may be. The gap in appearance from how she looked now to when she would take over the student hall made me feel uncomfortable. She loves this forest very much, isn't it only natural for her to know about one uninvited guest? I became worried about the two squirrel bodies hanging behind my back. I had also cut down a lot of trees. Don't worry about those useless things, Tilda. It's the providence of nature that the living is to catch and eat each other. Would Merylda be uncomfortable with just that? I guess even a scary-looking giant wolf has a soft heart. It's unexpected, right? Ha ha ha. Merylda, who protects the forest, was a high-ranking wind spirit in the form of a giant wolf. From what I could remember, she didn't usually appear in front of humans. I guess she was more tolerant than I had originally thought. Then it wasn't as strange that I had been setting up camp, hunting, and gathering in her forest thus far. Your appearance changed a lot. The Ed from last semester was more, we haven't talked a lot, but how should I say this? Your voice sounded a bit more whiny, but now it's more serious. Was it an image change? Something like that. Aha, I feel the same. The Ophelis hallmaid braided both sides of my hair. What do you think? Do I look more tomboyish? I couldn't respond as she twisted her hair. I wanted to commend her for cheerfully talking with Ed Roth's tailor, who was known as the biggest jerk in the world, but knowing her future, I couldn't respond with a cheerful smile. Well, if I wanted to keep my distance, that would be easy. I know a magic spell that would make anyone nervous and suspicious of me, no matter their saintly personality or how nice of a person they may be. Yennecar, it must have been fate that we met the day before school started. May I ask you for a favor? A favor. Recently, I'm in urgent need of money, so I have been looking for a place where I can borrow. I naturally cast the magic spell. Can you give me a guarantee? And cut. Chapter 9, The Day Before School Starts 2. Thanks to how my parents educated and raised me when I was young, just hearing the word, guarantee, always sent a shiver down my spine and caused my blood pressure to rise. But that was just me. Either way, the desperation of a human being cornered was more burdensome than one can imagine. After getting disowned and becoming penniless, I guess I needed some emergency funds. It could only be burdensome to suddenly hear such words from a classmate she wasn't even close with. But it wasn't like I didn't know that. Rather, that was exactly why I said that. Or could you lend me some money? I asked her. I see. But Yenikar's kindness was more incredible than I had imagined. That must have been difficult. From her kindness to her sympathy, I couldn't help but admire her. There must have been a lot of hardships that I was unaware of. I'm not sure what I can say to help you feel better, but I hope you can cheer up. Her cheerfulness without a lick of malice made me suspicious. Did she not know who Ed Roths-Taylor was? He was a person not even worthy of empty compliments. However, Yenikar's kindness even went above that. But I'm also not in a good position myself. If I could, I would definitely help you, but my family doesn't have the best circumstances either. Yenikar was the daughter of a small ranch in the eastern part of the kingdom of Spard. She wasn't born into a rich family. Rather, she grew up playing in the fields as a commoner. The only reason she was able to attend such a prestigious academy was due to her incredible spirit resonance. Due to her capabilities, she had good grades and received a scholarship. But cheer up. I'll be cheering for you. Her beautiful smile was her trademark. Seeing it had the ability to warm one's heart. But knowing what was in store for her, it wasn't pleasant. At the place where Ed Roths-Taylor had just left, sat a girl still reaching out towards the air. It's just as you said, Merylda, he's such a strange person. There were only 3 people at Sylvania Academy with a high enough spirit resonance that allowed them to see the high-ranking wind spirit Merylda. The second-year student, Yenikar Polarover. Lazy Lucy, who was talented in all different fields of magic. And Melina, a senior professor of spiritual studies. It didn't feel like this last year. A gust of wind blew as she stretched her arms out. Suddenly, there stood a giant wolf entwined with the wind. The wolf opened her mouth with a large amount of pressure and rubbed her face against Yenikar's hand while letting out a soft growl. Yenikar grinned as she stroked the wolf's jaw, which was several dozen times bigger than herself. I hope I can sign a contract with you one day, Merylda. Even though they were already like family, Yenikar's magic power was still too weak to sign a contract with Merylda. Although she was able to recently succeed in signing a contract with the high-ranking fire spirit Taken, Yenikar had to lie down for 10 days and 10 nights right after, suffering from a high fever. You're even a wolf now. You're starting to look like the owner of the forest more and more. As a high-ranking wind spirit, Merylda's form changed every time they met. Sometimes as a giant eagle, sometimes as a creepy crocodile, and sometimes, even as a crude wild boar. Merylda appeared as a variety of animals, but this was the first time she appeared in the shape of a wolf. Yenikar buried her face in Merylda's fluffy fur and giggled while rubbing her face. No matter how much I think about it, I don't think he could see you. Holding on to Merylda, Yenikar began thinking. She thought of Ed Roths-Taylor, who was disowned for doing something disgraceful. He didn't really have a large amount of talent or magic power. Nevertheless, there was something he said that bothered her. I guess even a scary-looking giant wolf has a soft heart. He definitely said that. He was referring to Merylda's wolf form, which Yenikar only saw for the first time after returning from her break. He mentioned it so casually and matter-of-factly. Who was he? And the intention of his following words was clear. Acting desperate and asking to borrow some money with such a calm tone and way of speaking. It was nothing like the desperation of a person stuck in a corner. Even Yenikar, who was approachable and always seemed to only smile stupidly, had as much sense like everyone else. When Yenikar tried to get closer to him, he indirectly avoided it. Well, there are people like that too, but I'm only human. In anger, she kicked Merylda's fur, who did nothing wrong. Of course, there was no way a girl's cute kick would be able to make a scratch on Merylda's skin, which was as hard as steel. I treated you as nicely as I could, but if you hit me like that, it breaks my heart, geez. She didn't have any particular feelings like that of a confession, but it somehow felt like she got dumped for no reason, making her grumpy. Well, we will keep seeing each other in the future, so we should become closer. Rubbing her face against the wolf's soft fur and tightly hugging Merylda, Yennecar smiled brightly. After all, the relationship between people was something unpredictable. She remembered when she became close to many of her classmates last year, but there seemed to be a lot more interesting students this year. Among the more interesting ones was Ed Roth's tailor. Even Merylda went so far as to refer to him as a fun person. For Yennecar, the world was always kind, like a flower field that was always full of the scent of flowers. No matter who it was, greeting someone with her bright smile would warm their heart and enable them to laugh together. No matter how nice a person was, there was always a bit of darkness somewhere in their heart. Merylda understood that. Nevertheless, she had no doubt that if she smiled brightly, their hearts would eventually open up. School starts tomorrow, I need to study hard again. And so a fellow student that caught her interest had appeared. Even that fact alone was a source of joy for Yennecar. She should stop paying attention to me now, right? I sat in front of the campfire and started cleaning up my outfit, putting in a last-minute effort to create a neat but inconspicuous style. The first thing I did was comb back my golden hair as much as possible to tidy it up. Then I removed all the useless accessories from my clothes. Trimming my growing beard also made a huge difference in my appearance. The problem of tuition fees would become a reality at the end of this semester. If I were not to receive a scholarship, I would have to leave the academy immediately. This meant that I had to train as much as I could during this semester. The magic department's curriculum had more free time than one would think, but training would still constantly occupy my time. My magic resonance and direct elemental magic proficiency had considerably progressed over the past few days. I used them every day, after all, to cut down trees, to make a fire. I continuously used them for the sake of my survival, to raise my mastery through repeated use. Magic skills details. Grade: low-grade magician. Specialized field: elements. Common magic. Fast casting level 2. Mana sense level 5. Fire element magic. Ignite level 5. Wind element magic. Wind blade level 4. My main magic's level increased quite a bit. Granted, it wasn't all that hard climbing to level 10, but this was still quite fast. There was a limit to learning magic by myself. But with school beginning, the types of magic I could learn and use would become quite diverse. My proficiency in my production skills would also naturally increase, which should significantly affect my dexterity. My problem was combat. I had hopelessly low physical and muscle strength. I had been doing all sorts of physical work these past few days, but my stats remained unchanged. This cursed body seemed like it wasn't born with any talent for physical abilities. But I was not the type to give up when the going got tough. There's nothing like aerobic exercise to train your physical strength. Although, at this point, when every day was like a series of aerobic exercises, it might be nonsense to actually schedule a time to exercise. However, this was my environment. The northern forest where I lived was quite far from the academic district located in the southern part of the island. The day I was disowned, I walked aimlessly and took about half a day to get to the forest. At that time, I walked deep in thought, took a break in the middle, and then walked around the streets here and there. Even then, the distance from here to the academic district couldn't be close. What was even worse was that I had to go to school every day. In other words, I would have to run to attend classes in the early hours of the morning, every day. I can think of it as physical training. Physical strength was the foundation for all actions. No matter how much one may technically excel or train their magic, physical strength was ultimately needed to support it. I heard that combat students had to run this much every morning, so it shouldn't be impossible for me. Even though I was from the magic department, I had no choice but to act as a student from the combat department would. This was something I didn't have the time to even protest about. Running to school every morning, gaining stats for my combat skills through hunting, woodworking, and other means to survive. As for my magic skills, I needed to constantly train my mana sense and basic elemental magic. At the same time, crafting various things necessary for my survival would take care of my life skills. My increasing dexterity and various production skills should be of great help in the future. But my alchemy skill, I wasn't sure yet. I didn't have any useful magic tools or alchemy supplies right now. Anyway, I need to focus on training this semester. Oh please, it would be great if I could avoid attracting any useless attention. Even without that, I already had so much work to do. Please. Chapter 10, Face to Face with the Dean 1. There was a question niggling at the back of my mind. But because I had been barely surviving, it was something I didn't have the luxury to think about. However, as the new semester was just about to begin, I naturally thought of it again. Just where in the world was the protagonist Taylor, and just what the hell had he been doing? An atmosphere of excitement was bound to form at the start of a new semester. Most of the students had already returned to their dorms as the break had ended. Even friends who hadn't seen each other in a long time had probably already caught up with each other. But it's still human nature to feel excited at the newness of attending the yearly opening ceremony. The student center was located at the center of the academic district. It comprised 3 buildings and was more commonly referred to as the student center. Among them was Kate Hall, which was located on the west side. It was often used for such large academy-wide events. There were dozens of large tables spread out in the huge auditorium, all of which were big enough to seat 10 people comfortably. Each table was laden with a banquet feast. For someone who had been living on fish and plants these past few days, it looked like heaven on earth. I woke up at 6 in the morning and walked from the northern forest all the way south to the academic district. To endure such a feast in front of me was an ordeal at a level beyond what mere human patience could endure. If I could take the leftovers, I wouldn't have to worry about food for a while. Was there a bag or a bowl somewhere where one could put some? That was what I thought, but I didn't dare do anything more. I hated the Academy's culture of nobility. Sylvania Academy liked to overly emphasize the need to maintain dignity. It would have been great if they ignored me were I to pick up the leftovers and take them with me. But I would lose points from my behavioral conduct grade if I were to get caught. It's great to see students who are growing even more with each semester. Also, what we discussed at Sylvania's academic affairs meeting was, it was a given that regardless of the generation and time, the school principal's speech was bound to be boring. Although because of this strange thing they call dignity, the Sylvania students were all sitting straight and listening in silence. All thousands of them. It was a ridiculous sight. It was moments like these when I realized the worth of Sylvania's name. Look over there, isn't that Ed Roth's Taylor? What? The second-year student who behaved indecently at the freshman entrance exam. Oh my, looking closely, his appearance is a bit strange, but it's definitely him. How could he shamelessly come to the entrance ceremony? No way, is he planning on continuing to attend school? Even though he had been disowned by his family. Of course, the all-too-friendly chatter about me didn't disappear at all. I sat amidst the students, hearing their honorable whispers of warm hospitality very clearly. Look at him. Look at how much he's fallen. He's completely ruined. Ruined. Shish, he'll hear you. So what if he hears? That person is no longer a noble. They didn't have to say all those things. As slowly and as gracefully as I could, I lifted some grilled turkey and potato salad into my mouth. I shouldn't miss out on the opportunity to recharge the energy my morning run drained from me. Hello. Just as I was focusing on recharging my energy, I was greeted by a lively greeting to my face. We meet again. There weren't many people who would brightly say hello to a fallen noble like Ed Roth's Taylor. When I looked up, just as I expected, it was Yennecar Polarover, smiling and greeting me. I finished moving in with my friend at Ophelis Hall, but I couldn't say hi to you, Ed. You weren't in your room. For a moment, I resisted the urge to frown. An alarm was ringing in my head. Be careful of her approach. Keep your distance. Nothing good would come out of you talking to me. Why? I spoke with my eyes instead of my mouth. I swept my eyes around the hall to tell her to look around. There were already people gossiping about us. Yennecar Polarover was treated somewhat like a mascot amongst the second years. There was no one who didn't know who she was, being the top student of our class. And because she was always lively and gave off a warm feeling towards others, she was well cherished by her friends. In addition to that, she also recently signed a contract with Taken, a high-ranking fire spirit. She was like a beacon of hope to the second years of the magic department. On the outside, it looked as if the innocent top student was talking to a piece of shit punk dropout. Naturally, the people around us began to look on with worry-filled eyes. In the end, there were some who urgently came and tried to rescue her. A short-haired girl with freckles and a redhead girl with long hair jumped from the crowd. Wow, Yennecar, it's been a while. Yennecar, did you have a good time in your hometown? Anyone could tell the girls were forcing the most awkward smiles as they greeted Yennecar and grabbed her arms. Nice. Good work. My classmates whose names I didn't know. Wait a minute. However, Yennecar miraculously escaped their hands and came back. I want to brag about this first before I go. What? I looked at her in disbelief as she reached out her hands toward my face. What do you think? Quote. Question mark quote. I sat still, staring at her. Yennecar had her hands clasped together, turning them here and there as she looked at them. It was as if she was stretching her hands at all sorts of angles to brag about how pale and white they were, which left me confused. After you left yesterday, it seems to have climbed out from the lake. Isn't he so cute and adorable? I signed the contract right away. He's my new friend. Here, why don't you try touching him? I was wondering what the hell she was talking about, but hearing the word contract made me realize what she was saying. In short, it was a spirit. I couldn't tell what kind of shape it had, so I didn't know why she was bragging about it being cute. She was constantly changing the angle of her arms, as if there was something swirling around it. Anyways, I couldn't see it. Well, even though I couldn't see it, I could roughly infer how it was. After hearing all this fuss, he must be cute. If I wanted to become closer with Yennecar, maybe I could say, he's so cute, or, he's so adorable. Or maybe something like, I also want to sign a contract with a spirit like him. I'm so jealous. Or other such things. In terms of friendliness, she was the best in the class. In terms of social life, she was someone who was always comfortable to be with. There was no need to force conversations or struggle to find a topic that suited you. She was someone who would continue conversations cheerfully even if she was just listening to a story. She was someone that everyone in the second-year class loved. But because of that, I had to be more careful if I wanted to keep my distance. She was someone I could easily become close to. Therefore, I needed to make conscious efforts not to. The way to do so was not difficult to answer. I don't get what you're saying. All I had to do was block the flow of conversation. I can't see anything. I can't see spirits because I don't have spirit resonance. I got rid of all our common interests in one stroke. There would be nothing more for the other person to say if I quickly cut things like this. It would be awkward to try and search for another topic to talk about. And because Yennecar was no fool, she would notice that I didn't want to become close with her. Having lived surrounded by kind people, it must be difficult for her to handle such hostility. Quote. Is that so? Yennecar answered, tilting her head as she faced me. You can't see spirits. This was nothing unusual. Not all students in the magic department could see spirits. Nevertheless, Yennecar tilted her head a few times. Yennecar, quickly, let's go. They're going to run out of desserts. Her rescue team came back. They quickly hugged onto Yennecar and took her back into the crowd. All right, I'll see you again later. It was a spectacle seeing her smiling widely and waving at me. Well, her rescuers would warn her while eating dessert. Do not approach Ed Roth's Taylor carelessly. She would slowly start to lose interest in me then. It wasn't so bad, if you ask me. Finally, the top students of each grade will award the Sage's Seal to the freshman representative. Students whose names are called, please come up to the podium. The second-year representative Yennecar Polarover, the third-year representative Dyke Elpelin, the fourth-year representative Amy Innes, and the representative of the freshmen, the respectable Princess Peenia Elias Crowell. The princess was still treated as part of the royal family. Calling her name in public always required addressing her as respectable. It wasn't strange that Princess Peenia was selected as the freshman representative. Lazy Lucy may have unbeatable grades and talents, but she didn't have the personality for it. Besides, there was no other person who fit the role of representative better than Princess Peenia in the first place. The first-year students this year were full of jewels. The gap between them and our class was ridiculous. It couldn't be helped. After all, the protagonist of this world was a freshman himself. There were some things players noticed when playing Sylvania's failed swordmaster. Why were the first-year students the only ones who were doing well? The benevolent Princess Peenia took control of the student council in her second year as the de facto student body president, becoming an influential figure who controlled academic affairs and rooted out injustice within the academy. On the contrary, the Golden Daughter, Lortel, encroached on the darkness of Sylvania and took control of the flow and distribution of money, coordinating interests between the students to make large amounts of money. Meanwhile, Lazy Lucy, who was born with talent and blessed by the stars of Glocht, became an archmage who came out in history books. There were more, but it would be difficult to mention every single important character. The important thing was they were all gathered among the first-year students. The semester hadn't even started yet, but thanks to the first years who shone like gems, the atmosphere among the faculty must have already been exciting. The Sage's Seal was a record left behind by the founder of Sylvania Academy, Sylvania Robester. There was always a ceremony to award the seal to the freshmen for them to inherit the will of Sylvania, who emphasized the virtue of learning. People tried to give it various meanings, but it was just all ceremonial. I kept looking around as I watched the ceremony come to its final stages. Right now, everyone was sitting here in Kate Hall regardless of their batch. There weren't many opportunities for students from different classes and majors to sit together. The auditorium was filled with freshmen who had varied talents and backgrounds. But these people are nothing more than just characters. What's really important was to find this world's protagonist, Taylor. Thank you for running around on your own and solving all the hardships that would happen to Sylvania Academy without me having to lift a finger, you pushover. No, I meant, you troubleshooter of a nobleman. There was no one I would be more thankful for because he understood all my hardships and would take care of them for me. Also, the surest way to check that the world was going in the way that I knew was to check on Taylor. His actions would soon determine the history of this world. I should walk around and check where Taylor might be. Either way, Ed Roth's Taylor had already been completely ruined, so I could even walk out if I wanted to. After all, no one would care whether I was alone or not at such a grand entrance ceremony. No, it would actually attract more attention if I just stay put here. Since I was already quite full, now would be the perfect time to get up and look around. This is an announcement. Can the student, Ed Roth's Taylor, visit Dean McDowell's office? Thank you. I suddenly heard my name from the platform. McDowell. That was a name that I knew. He was the chief dean of Sylvania's magic department. In fact, he was a figure influential enough to have the authority to appoint professors. And he was looking for me. Don't tell me, am I getting expelled? These days, did the highest academic authority directly notify students of their expulsion from the academy? To bid me goodbye so earnestly on my way out. Have my chances already been ruined? I wiped my face. No, let's stay calm. But what's this? Just what was going on?